All right, diving in today, folks, with a familiar name for our regular listeners, Karol Berkovec. And his latest article, it's a doozy. LLMs and quantum paradox. Who's observing when no one's looking?
Catchy title, right. It really gets to the core of a head-scratcher in quantum physics, the wave function collapse.
Right, that whole how does a particle go from all these possibilities to one definite state, even when, well, nobody's seemingly watching?
Exactly. Berkovec kind of circles back to his earlier work, Every Bit Matters, to tackle this.
Which, if I recall, was all about how matter and information, they're like two sides of the same coin, yeah.
Precisely. Can't have one without the other. Every bit of matter has info encoded in it, and every bit of info needs a physical, something to exist.
So it's not just that info is carried by matter, but it's like baked into the very structure of it.
Exactly. They're intertwined, and that has huge implications, especially for this wave function collapse mystery.
Okay, so how does that connection, the matter info thing, how does that help us understand why a particle suddenly decides on one reality out of all the possibilities?
Berkovec says it's not necessarily about a conscious observer making that happen. Instead, it's pointing to a much deeper process tied to this fundamental connection between matter and information. He brings in an idea from John Archibald Wheeler to kind of solidify this.
Wheeler, wasn't he the black hole guy? What do you say that's relevant here?
Yeah, that's him. Well, he had this famous phrase, it from bit. Basically, everything physical, every it, comes from bits of information.
So the universe is basically information at its core.
That's the idea. And Berkovec takes this further, saying this info isn't just carried by matter, it's like the blueprint of it. Like matter provides the canvas and info paints the picture.
So how does that apply to, like, everyday stuff, for us non-physicists?
Well, think about it like this. Every particle, every system, it's holding info, making it an object, right? But when these systems interact, they're swapping info, and that makes them subjects too.
So the act of interaction itself is a kind of observation.
Exactly. Every interaction at its core is a measurement, a back and forth of info. Berkovec even puts it into an equation. The state of a system at any time, he calls it saint, depends on its previous state, ST1, and the surrounding context.
So the current state is built from the past state plus whatever's influencing it now.
Right. Like, history matters. And in the quantum world, if the environment gets involved in an interaction, a record of that gets baked into the system's new state. That's key for understanding collapse as an internal update, not just something imposed from outside.
Okay, so we've got this mutual measurement thing going on. How does Berkovec link that to the wave function actually collapsing, that transition to one concrete reality?
Well, he says that from this matter information perspective, measurement isn't some outsider looking in and forcing a choice. It's more like information being etched into the very fabric of matter. And there are already ideas in physics that support this. Take decoherence theory, for example. It shows how interactions with the environment, like bumping into air molecules or light particles, can observe quantum systems. This causes them to lose their fuzzy quantumness and snap into a definite state. It's like the environment is constantly nudging the quantum world into making choices.
So the environment is like a built-in observer.
You could say that. And then there's relational quantum mechanics, or RQM. It takes this even further, saying every interaction is a mutual measurement, just like Berkovec's talking about. Each particle is both the observer and the observed.
Whoa, so it's like a universe of, like, interconnected eyes constantly looking and being looked at.
Exactly. And Berkovec goes even broader, envisioning a universe that's constantly observing itself through these endless interactions, a continuous flow of information that makes reality what it is.
It's like the universe is in a constant conversation with itself, and reality is what emerges from that dialogue.
Beautifully put. And then Berkovec lays down some theorems to really ground his argument. His first one is, all changes start from within.
All changes start from within. That's pretty profound. What's that about?
Basically, he's saying that no matter what's happening outside a system, it won't change unless that system itself registers the effect, internally. External stuff has to be internalized to cause a real change.
That makes sense. Like, you can try to convince someone of something, but they only actually change their mind if they process it and, like, accept it internally.
Perfect example. He also talks about computers. One computer can only affect another if it sends data that the other one can receive and process.
So it's not about forcing change from the outside, but triggering a response from within.
Right. It's like object A can't change object B directly. It has to change itself in a way that B will then react to. Okay, yeah. His second theorem is a bit of a mind bender. Information recording is irreversible.
Irreversible, as in Once it's recorded, you can't just erase it.
Exactly. He gives a few reasons why. First, any recording leaves a physical trace, like a mark on a detector or a neuron firing. Second, the environment around the system changes in response to this new info, so the record is spread out.
So it's not just the thing being observed that changes, but its whole context updates too.
Yep. And even if you could somehow reset the observed system to how it was before, the environment would still remember what happened. It's like trying to unring a bell the sound's already out there,
So to undo it, you'd have to erase the information from the whole universe.
basically. He says it would be like reversing time itself, possible in theory, but practically impossible. Once info is recorded, it's essentially permanent.
That's pretty wild.
He uses examples like a neuron firing, which changes its own state and the state of other neurons connected to it, or a Geiger counter clicking. You can't just unclick it. And even LLMs, once they generate a word, that word becomes part of their context, influencing everything that comes after.
So it's not just about recording, but the environment updating itself, making the change essentially permanent.
Exactly. And that reinforces the idea that collapse is an informational event, not just a physical one. A system goes from many possibilities to one when that one gets irreversibly documented. And he stresses that you don't need a conscious observer for this. Any good recording does the trick.
That's pretty significant, taking consciousness out of the equation.
He does point out that while physics usually sees time as smooth and continuous, information seems to update in steps, like a computation or a neuron firing. But the interesting thing is, these two views don't actually conflict.
Huh, that's cool. All right, so we've got change starting internally and recording being irreversible. What's the third big idea?
Theorem 3. The productive edge maximizes complexity. This one's about how order and complexity arise in systems that feed their outputs back into themselves, like a loop.
Productive edge. Sounds like walking a tightrope.
That's a good way to put it. He says that maximum complexity happens at this productive edge, a sweet spot between total stability and pure chaos, and wave function collapse is like falling off this edge.
So not too rigid, not too random, but just right.
Exactly. If a system never changes, it's boring, no new info. But if it's all random, there's no structure, no meaning. The productive edge is where you get enough interaction for cool stuff to happen, but enough stability for it to make sense.
Like a brain needs to be stable enough to hold thoughts, but flexible enough to learn new things.
Right. Or think about fractals, those crazy patterns. They form at the edge of chaos, where the branching isn't totally fixed, but not completely random either.
And he ties this to LLMs too, right? Like how they generate text.
Yep. They need randomness to be creative, but structure to make sense. When an LLM picks the next word, it's like a collapse from all the possible words to one choice. He sees the wave function as exploring possibilities at this productive edge, and collapse happens when that choice is made and recorded, like solidifying a path.
So the most interesting stuff is happening right before that collapse, at that edge.
That's the idea. Now, building on these theorems, Berkovec gives us two corollaries. The first one is about this duality of subject and object.
Meaning something can be both the observer and the observed.
Exactly. Corollary 1 says every system is both. It's a subject when it updates itself based on info, and an object when it's being acted upon, even by itself. He ties this back to theorems 1 and 2. Systems update themselves, making them subjects, but they're also inputs to their own future states, making them objects too.
So like my mind is a subject when I'm experiencing something, but an object when I'm reflecting on that experience.
Exactly. And remember that LLM experiment where it commented on its own output? It was being both subject and object there too. Berkovec says there's no real outside perspective in physics. Everything's in this web of interactions. Quantum measurement is just a specific case of this broader phenomenon.
He even addresses that argument about a rock not being a subject, right?
He does. He says, sure, a rock isn't consciously observing like we do, but if it changes in response to its environment, like expanding from heat, it's participating in this dance of interaction, making it both object and subject in a way.
Huh. That's a really interesting way to think about it. So what's the second corollary about?
This one gets into the importance of subjective experience. Corollary 2 says objective knowledge comes from interacting with the outside world, but subjective experience comes from a system's internal evolution, its own internal story.
So objective is what's happening out there, and subjective is how the system makes sense of it.
You got it. It goes back to that equation. The current state depends on the previous state and the context. Objective knowledge is about modeling that context, but subjective experience is how the system processes it all internally. Think of a scientist. Their instruments give them objective data, but their aha moment, that's subjective, coming from their understanding of the data.
It's like learning to swim. Once you know how, you just know. You can't really explain it objectively.
Exactly, it's an internalized knowing. He connects this back to quantum collapse, too. The objective event of collapse is like a subjective state change for the system itself. He says that for these recursive systems, experience itself is knowledge, it's how the system knows itself. And some truths might only be accessible through that internal perspective.
That's deep, man. Like some things you can only know by experiencing them.
Exactly. All right, so to wrap things up, Berkovec basically says that this whole matter-information duality, plus this idea of recursive systems, it all helps us understand wave function collapse without needing an external observer.
And those corollaries about everything being both subject and object and the importance of subjective experience, those are key takeaways too, right?
Definitely. He's saying there's no single watcher out there. Every system is observing and being observed all the time. He paints this picture of a universe constantly measuring itself, every particle, every AI, every one of us contributing to this grand story that's always unfolding. And he leaves us with this mind-blowing idea. Our subjective experiences, those inner feelings and knowings, might be crucial to how the universe understands itself.
So going back to the title, who's observing when no one's looking? Berkovec is saying it's the universe itself, constantly interacting and changing, right?
That's the gist. He draws these amazing parallels with LLMs, showing how they do this kind of self-observation and irreversible change, too. And it makes you wonder, if every interaction is a kind of observation and everything is both observer and observed, what does that mean for our place in the universe?
Big questions, man. Definitely makes you think. And for those who want to dive deeper, check out Berkovec's article, LLMs and Quantum Paradox. Who's observing when no one's looking? And his earlier work, Every Bit Matters When Physics Meets Meaning.
They're a great read, really mind-expanding stuff, connecting the very nature of reality to what's happening with AI. Definitely worth a look.